अच्छा इसको इधर कर लें थोड़ा। हाँ, यहाँ तक ठीक है। ठीक है। Well, good morning to all of you. Now, in yesterday's class, we were talking about libertarianism, the third important theory of ethics that we have planned to cover in our class. So, just to have a small recap of the libertarian theory, we had seen here that according to libertarian philosophers, that every individual should have an absolute and fundamental right of liberty to do whatever that person wants, with only one exception, that the person should not do aggression, engage in an act of aggression against someone else. And aggression is defined as the use of force or a threat of the use of force against the person or property of someone else. So that is the starting point of libertarianism that we had seen, and we have seen many of the aspects, like for example, they support liberty not as a means but as an end. They support liberty on the basis of the fundamental principle of self-ownership. They also, we have seen that they also hold that apart from the non-aggression, the only other ethical obligation that we have is the obligation of consent, which puts two obligations, one on the self, that person must do what we have consented to, and second, the others must respect the consent of somebody else. We had also seen that one important consequence of liberty was the respect for a completely free market. Now, the government should not interfere into the market in any manner. That is one thing that we had talked about. And the last one thing that we had seen was the idea of the minimum government. So they support a minimum government in which the government should perform only two functions: enforcement of the contract and the assurance of the non-aggression. Combined together, we call that as the protection of individual liberty. So, only thing that the government should do is the protection of individual liberty. Everything else that the government would be doing would be unethical. So, government should not do anything. So, whenever government makes a law, then it must ask this question, that what is the purpose of this law? If the purpose of the law is to ensure enforcement of the contract, prevent cheating, it is a good law. If the purpose of the law is to ensure non-violence, prevention of aggression, good law. And if any other purpose is there, then that will be a bad law. So that is the only criteria. They do not agree with Bentham's idea that law should try to maximize the happiness in the society. They simply say that purpose of the law is to simply protect the individual liberty. So that is what we had talked about yesterday. Now, next important thing that we have to talk about now in our class is that apart from these two things, what are the other things that the government is doing which, according to the libertarian principle, is unethical? So that we will talk about shortly. But before that, let us take a question. I think there is a question related to maybe yesterday's class. Good morning, sir. Good morning. So first question is from Mandeep, many questions rather in one. So if liberty is an absolute end of moral argument, can every act be justified under the carrot of liberty except for two acts, Mandeep? One is aggression. You cannot justify aggression on the ground of liberty, and cheating. You cannot justify cheating, violation of the consent. So if I consented to something to you, then it's my duty to do that. I don't have the, that's why I told you that once I have given consent that I will teach ethics to you, then I do not have the liberty to not teach ethics after that. I have given up that liberty. So every act except for these two acts, aggression and cheating, except for these two acts, every other act is morally justified according to liberty. So that is the first question. Second question, if neither the state nor the family owns the individual, then how can the state justify the presence of marriage acts, section 377, active euthanasia, etc.? Is this not an act of aggression by the state? That we will talk a little about in today's class. That is what we are going to talk about. These things can or cannot be, may or may not be justified, because depending on what is the purpose. For example, if the purpose of the marriage act to prevent cheating in marriage, then that will be a good law. but otherwise it can be a bad law, that we will see in today's class. Similarly, if the section 377 we will talk about in today's class. So these questions we will talk about today's class, but remember one thing, that if the purpose of the law is to prevent cheating, in marriage also cheating can happen. So to prevent cheating, law can be made in the marriage also, but not to ensure that marriage is good or bad. We will see that shortly in today's class. Third question, in the MP urination case, there was a contract between the accuser and the accused, but there seemed to be a clash. What would be the libertarian stand regarding the incident? Are you sure that there was a contract? Did the victim agree that, okay, you urinate upon me and I am okay with that? So it did appear to be an act of aggression. He was perhaps forced to be under that urination. So there was a force, it was an act of aggression. So if it was, again in a hypothetical situation, if it was an act of consent, that if the victim agreed that, okay, I am willing, he was a masochist person maybe, he agreed that, okay, you can urinate upon me, I am okay with that, then this would have been justified. But that does not appear to be the case. It appears to be some sort of force is there. So, well, that answers your question. Next question, sir, according to libertarian point of view, SDM Jyoti Misra is right, absolute liberty, but she cheated her husband and children. How is justified? Who asked this question? Well, sorry, first of all, I am not much aware of the whole case of Jyoti Misra. I just heard it from social media, but I am not aware of the whole thing, but whole case again. So I cannot comment on that. Only thing that I can say that if it was a case of cheating, for example, then that would have been a wrong thing, that she would be punished, that she should be punished accordingly to libertarian. But remember, marriage can be dissolved. I don't know whether they were in marriage or not. I'm sorry that I do not know about that. I have heard just that passing on some social media, and I'm not that active in social media and all. So sorry, I'm not able to tell you. But if it was a case of cheating, if their marriage was there and then after she dissolved the marriage according to the law, then there is nothing wrong in that. Men also leave their wives, and wife also has a right to leave their husband if they think that it is not working up under law without cheating. So that might have been justified. I am not very sure about the case, so let you not force me to give an opinion. Next question. The central government has promulgated the bill to focus on the data privacy and localization to prevent cross-boundary data flow that violates privacy of its citizen. What is the ethical concern involved with this move of central government? I hope that you can figure it out yourself, that yes, data privacy is an important part of the liberty. So if the government makes some, you can say, rule, some law, you can say, in which the data of the individual is protected, then that will be justified law, because that is a part of the self ownership of the individual. Government must protect the liberty of an individual. So if the government is making a law to protect the privacy of the individual, then that law would be justified, because that is a part of the self ownership of the individual. Government must protect the self ownership right of the individual. So if some corporate, for example, are using the data of an individual for some profit without taking the consent, then that will be unethical. So that government can act in that case. Next question, Anirban. Are social contract theory and social utilitarianism similar? Social utilitarianism is not a word that we normally use, but remember, utilitarianism gives a credence to the social contract theory. Utilitarian theory simply tells us that what should be the nature of the social contract. So this theory simply tells us social contract should always aim. When I say that law must aim at, then law is a social contract. So utilitarian philosophy will say a social contract must always try to maximize the happiness in the society. So it is one type of social contract theory. It talks about nature of social contracts. Libertarian talks about a different nature of social contract that we will talk about. What social contract should involve and what it should not involve. So in yesterday's class, we had talked about what the social contract actually involves. That a social contract must protect individual liberty, which involves two things: prevent cheating and prevent harm. But except for that, social contract should not do. So everything else that a social contract is doing, government is doing, will be unethical according to them. That should be not beyond the social contract. That should be only be individual contract. We'll see about all of that shortly. Now, write down next question, next important thing. Change the paragraph and then after write further. The following government actions are The following government actions are unethical because the following government actions are unethical because they violate the individual liberty. The following government actions are unethical because they violate the individual liberty. So, the following thing according to libertarian theory is unethical, it is wrong that the government should not be doing. So, these things are beyond the scope of a libertarian social contract, that government is overstepping its jurisdiction in the libertarian social contract. What are these things? First one, write down, the government should not try to redistribute the income and wealth in the society. The government should not try to redistribute the income and wealth in the society in order to reduce inequality. The government should not try to redistribute the income and wealth in the society in order to reduce inequality. Now, this is the first important thing that they say the government should not be doing. What does it mean? It means something like this. The idea is that if you look at, we will talk about redistribution later. Let us briefly talk about inequality. You know, inequality is, as all of you know, is a major problem in the modern society. Today's society is highly unequal. So, on the one hand, you all know there are people like, say, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jay Bezos, for example. So, or in India, people like Mukesh Ambani, Gautam Adani, etc. They are so wealthy that it is very difficult for us, it is almost impossible for us to even imagine the amount of wealth that they have. On the other hand, there are millions of people in the world who are so poor that they do not have the food to eat, they do not have the clothes to wear, they do not have the house to live in. The most basic necessities of a human life. So, that is the amount of inequality. You know, I was reading about a book on inequality almost 10-15 years ago, maybe. Well, this book had talked about the amount of inequality. Forget about India, or you can say, you know, about inequality. I hope that all of you may be aware that every year Oxfam, World Bank publishes an Oxfam report, that under that report, inequality report, it makes an index of all the nations in the world on the inequality ground, that which country in the world is most unequal and which country is least. So, starting from the most unequal country, number 1, to the least unequal at the end of it. Now, can you tell me in the last year's data, which country in the world was found to be the most unequal country in the world? I hope if you read the newspaper, I hope that you will be able to tell us. So, the most unequal country in the world according to the Oxfam report last year was Russia. But can you tell me what was India's status in that, can say, the inequality report, Oxfam report? Well, this report had created lots of controversy in India, that's why you should be aware of that. Condition or position of India in that report was second. According to Oxfam report, which the government of India had rejected then, well, but according to Oxfam report, India is the second most unequal country in the world after Russia. So, India is a highly unequal country according to such reports and all, and during COVID time, inequality has become even more stark in India. Rich has become much richer and poor have become much poorer. So, I was reading about some time ago that a book that I talked about, forget about India and Russia, that we are developing countries, but even rich countries like America, for example, was found to be extremely unequal. According to that book that I remember, in America also, that 10% richest people, and this is old data, 10-15 years old, today it might be even worse. 10% of the richest people in America own around 70% of the wealth of the nation. That is the amount of wealth. So that is the amount of inequality even in America has. In India, perhaps this percentage might be even 1 or 2% maybe. So 1% people perhaps in India own more than 50-60% of the wealth. You can do some research on that and figure out about it. Well, because every year we talk about inequality in India. Inequality report, or can say Freedom House, many other organizations publish such reports and all, and many books have been written on that topic. So inequality is a big problem in India. On the one hand, there are people like say Bill Gates, well, who are so wealthy that it is difficult for us to even imagine the amount of wealth that they have. And there are millions of people who are, you can say, so poor that they cannot afford the food also. Now the question is that this amount of inequality that exists in the world, is that ethically justified? What do you think a utilitarian like John Stuart Mill will say? I hope that you can figure out the answer. A utilitarian like John Stuart Mill will say that this type of inequality existing in the world is unethical. Why is it unethical? Because such an unequal world is making the world a lot unhappier. Suppose, for example, the total wealth of Bill Gates is say $82 billion. It might be anything, but well, it is something like this, $82 billion. So much of wealth in the hand of one person, well, is that not creating a very unhappy world? Suppose, for example, if you take 50% of wealth of Bill Gates and distribute that among the poor people in Africa, well, will that not make a happier world? So that will actually create a lots of happiness in the world. So this type of inequality that exists in the world, according to utilitarian philosophers, that is unethical. That such concentration of wealth in the hands of few people is making the world unhappy. That is why John Stuart Mill, think of it, Mill was a sort of libertarian, because he was talking about liberty so much, but still he was very afraid of the free market economy in a way. So towards the end of his life, he became more a socialist rather than a free market supporter. Well, remember, free market is often considered to be a necessary condition for liberty. Without free market, liberty will be meaningless. But towards the end of his life, he became more a socialist rather than a free market, well, evangelist, a supporter maybe. He had written somewhere, there is a quotation of Mill. He had said that the free market economy has been able to solve the problem of production, but it has not been able to solve the problem of distribution. So free market economy acts in such a manner that it has created production, solve the problem of production. Production has become very efficient. We had seen that in yesterday's class. So free market economy, as suggested by people like Adam Smith, has become extremely efficient, the mass line production and all those things, you know. So free market economy has made the production very efficient, no doubt about that. It has been able to solve the problem of production, but it has not been able to solve the problem of distribution, because free market operates in such a manner that the money or wealth always have a tendency to get concentrated in the hand of few people. So it operates in that manner. So during the time of Mill, also during industrial revolution, you may be aware that factory owners were extremely rich and laborers working in those factories were extremely poor. So that extreme rich on the one hand and extreme poverty on the other hand, that happens. So wealth often have tendency to get, you can say, concentrated in the free market economy. This is how the free market often works. So that's why he suggested that, well, in a free market economy, we can allow the production, but distribution has to be done by the government. Some amount of redistribution must be done. Government must play a role, otherwise it will create a unhappy society, a bad society. So there was a contradiction in Mill's idea on that case. So you can say utilitarian philosophers are extremely afraid of this type of inequality. In fact, there is a very powerful, important utilitarian philosopher today, Peter Singer. I might have mentioned his name in my earlier class also. So Peter Singer is a professor at Harvard University, and he is one of the most well-known, most respected utilitarian philosopher of our time. He had suggested in a book that he has written, Life You Can Save. In that book, he has suggested that every American who is earning more than $30,000 a year, $30,000, he assumed that $30,000 is sufficient amount of money for an American to live a good lifestyle. So he says anybody who is earning more than $30,000, well, they should donate every single penny of that beyond that, as long as there is a single person in the world who is dying of hunger. So he claimed that if you are consuming more than $30,000, then your consumption is unethical. You are actually contributing in making an unhappy world. So this is the type of suggestion that these people gave. So according to utilitarians, this type of inequality that exists in the world is unethical, it is immoral, it is unjustified. We often call this type of wealth that the people have as filthy wealth, dirty wealth, etc., etc. That is a term that people often use for the concentration of wealth for the wealthy people. So the question is that this type of wealth that the people have, like $82 billion one person having, is that ethically justified? Utilitarian will say no, but libertarian will say that yes, it is justified. A libertarian will say, now we'll come back to libertarian idea. Libertarian will say just because somebody is wealthy does not mean that he is unethical. Just because somebody is wealthy does not mean that he is unethical. Wealth can be ethical also and wealth can be unethical also. Bill Gates is also wealthy and Dawood Ibrahim was also wealthy. Is there any difference between wealth of this person and that person? Well, let us see that how do you know whether the wealth is justified or not. Write down further, change the paragraph and then after write further. The income and wealth of a person, or 1 minute, the fairness of the income and wealth of a person, the fairness of the income and wealth of a person can be decided. The fairness of the income and wealth of a person can be decided only on the following two grounds. The fairness of the income and wealth of a person can be decided only on the following two grounds. So, the idea is that if you want to see that how you can say whether the wealth of a person like Bill Gates or Dawood Ibrahim, is it fair or unfair? How do you know? Well, it can be decided only on the basis of two grounds. So, let us talk about what is the ground of fairness about the income and wealth. First one is, write down further, fairness in initial acquisition. Fairness in initial acquisition. So first, if you want to see whether Bill Gates or Dawood Ibrahim's wealth is fair or unfair, then check one thing, fairness in initial acquisition. What does that mean? It simply means that whenever we start an economic activity, we invest some some initial money. Now, from where did you bring that money? That is called initial acquisition. So, when Bill Gates started his company, the Microsoft, for example, he must have invested some money in that. From where did he bring that money? Was that fair or not? How do you know the fairness? Again, there are two criteria for that. Did it follow the non-aggression principle and did it follow all the consent or contract? Did it follow the consent or contract or not? So, well, when he invested money in his business, for example, the Microsoft, for example, then did he violate the non-aggression? Did he rob that money? Did he steal that money? Did he kill somebody for that money? If yes, then his initial acquisition was unfair and his wealth today also will become unfair. So that is the first thing. This is the problem. This might be the problem with Dawood Ibrahim. He might have started his business activity maybe by using aggression, force or threat. But Bill Gates does not appear to have, have done that. Then after check the second important thing, can say consent or contract. Now, did he borrow that money from somewhere and did not return that money? Did he cheat somebody to take the money and start his business? If yes, then his initial acquisition was unfair and his wealth today also will become unfair. But if he did not harm anybody, if he did not cheat anybody, he just borrowed some money maybe from a bank, and if he returned every single penny of that according to the contract, along with the interest, etc., then his initial acquisition was fair. So Bill Gates does appear to have fulfilled this first condition. Then after, you have to check the second condition of fairness. Write down further. Fairness in exchange or transfer. Fairness in exchange or transfer. Now the idea is that every economic activity involves some exchange or transfer. So for example, let's take the same case of Bill Gates. When he started his company, the Microsoft, then he has created a software called Windows, and then after he offered that Windows to the people and people bought it. People gave him money in return. That is called exchange. He offered a service and people paid him the money for that. So that is exchange of Windows and exchange of money. That was transfer of one or the other. Now, was that transfer, was that fair or not? How do you check that fairness? Well, again the same two criteria. That did it follow the non-aggression principle? So, did he force people to buy his window? If he forced people to buy his windows, then his exchange was unfair and his wealth today will also become unfair. But he did not appear to have forced people. Did he? Second thing, did he violate any contract? Did he promise something to the people which he did not fulfill in the contract? If he did not fulfill any promise he made in the terms and condition of the contract, then at the Windows, then he cheated people. And if he cheated people, then that will be unfair. And because of that, his wealth today also will become unfair, that can be confiscated. But he does not appear to fulfill any of these things. So he simply offered people to the Windows and people bought it, and he provided the Windows along with all the terms and conditions that he offered to the people. So if that was the case, then his exchange was also fair. So these two things are fair. Then after, change the paragraph, then after write further. If these two things are fair, then whatever is the income and wealth of a person, if these two things are fair, then whatever is the income and wealth of a person, and whatever is the income and wealth of a person, and whatever is the inequality, and whatever is the inequality that results from it, and whatever is the inequality that results from it, comma, it is fair, and the government should not try to, it is fair and the government should not try to artificially reduce it. And the government should not try to artificially reduce it. Government should not try to artificially reduce it. So that is the next important thing. So the idea here is that if these two things are fair, then after, whatever is the income and wealth of a person, whether it is $1, $1 million, $1 billion or $1 trillion, whatever is the income and wealth of a person, and however inequality that results from it, it is fair. And the government should not try to artificially reduce it. Now, if you look at, according to these people, if you look at equality, for example, if you look at equality, then libertarians will say that equality is a very artificial construct. Nobody can make equality, it can never be achieved. It is impossible for us to achieve because nature does not want equality, nature does not allow equality. So inequality is always an artificial, unnatural thing that we have to bring about. Suppose, for example, I want to make an equal society. Suppose I want to make an equal society, and suppose I am a dictator, I have all the powers in my hand. And I want everybody in India to be equally wealthy. Everybody must have equal amount of wealth. How can we ensure it? Simplest way to do is that suppose I will take every single penny from everyone. All the money, all the wealth of Ambani and Adani, and all the wealth of you people, the middle class, upper class, the lower class, the laborers, farmers, everybody's wealth I take. And then after, suppose I equally distribute that among all the Indians. Everybody has become equal now, everybody has equal amount of wealth. After that, libertarians will say, after that, if I give liberty to the people, then within a minute, well, what will happen? That within a minute, some people will become richer and some people will become poorer. Within a minute, that may possibly happen. Some people will become rich and some others will become poorer. Why so? Not because this person is a talented person and he is a dumb person, not because he is meritorious and he has no merit. It is very important thing to understand about the wealth according to these people is that people become wealthy or poor not because of their talent on their merit. People become wealthy or poor because of their choice. So in a free society, different people make different choice, and depending on the choice, some people earn more money and some people earn less money. Suppose for example, this person decides to start a business, and if he has a good businessman, then of course he will become wealthier. And suppose this person starts an NGO, for example, social service, for example, he becomes a painter, a poet, for example, he will become poorer definitely. So not that this person is a less talented person, it is just that he made a different choice that will make him poorer, he made a different choice that will make him richer. So people become rich and poor not because of their talent or merit, people become rich and poor because of their choice. Just think of it, a few years ago, there was a young man in India from BITS Pilani, as far as I remember. He was a fresher from engineering and he was hired by Google and he was offered a salary of 2 crore rupees. Highest salary ever offered to an Indian till that time as a fresher. Now here is a young man at 22 years of age, he was earning the salary of 2 crore rupees. Now tomorrow if you become a civil servant, for example, then can you ever imagine to earn that much of money that this person will be able to earn, even if you become very corrupt? Well, of course, you should not be corrupt, but even if you become corrupt, then also it will be next to impossible for you to earn that much of money. And even if you are able to earn that much of money by using corrupt means maybe, then also you will never be able to live a lifestyle, spend that money the way he can freely spend. You will always be afraid of the CBI area, etc. So you will never be that as wealthy as that person. Does it mean that he is a very intelligent person and you are not that? Well, it is not that question. It is just that he made a different choice and you are making a different choice. Your choice to become a civil servant will never make you wealthy. So once you make a choice to become a civil servant, then you should stop comparing yourself with Ambani and Adani. You can never be like them, that wealthy. So, and again you should keep that in mind that it's not because you can say they are talented people and you are not. It's just that they made a different choice and you are making a different choice. So we earn money not on the basis of our talent, we earn wealth not on the basis of our talent, we earn money and wealth, etc. on the basis of our choice. And under liberty, different people make different choice. And depending on that, some people become rich, some people become poor. You cannot make an equal society. Equality is impossible. So if you want to keep a society equal, then well, every time, the moment he earns more money, take that money from this person and distribute that among that people. It will be a continuous affair. Liberty is impossible in that. So equality and liberty can never coexist. If you want to make an equal society, then forget liberty. And if you want to make a liberty-based society, forget equality. Both of them can never coexist together. This is what these people will say. So idea is that these people will say that if you look at equality, then there are two types of equality we can talk about. First is equality of outcome. Equality of outcome. So that means that yes, outcome of, so I work hard and outcome of my work is the income, the money that I earn. So that is the outcome of my effort. And second is the equality of opportunity. Now, according to the libertarian philosophy, that equality of outcome is not the job of the government. Equality of opportunity is the job of the government. So, government cannot ensure that how much money I earn, outcome. So, that is not something that government can say ensure or determine or to even think of to make a policy on. But only thing that government should do is to create an opportunity for me to. So, government cannot make me a Mukesh Ambani. That is not job of the government. But suppose if I want to become Mukesh Ambani by working very hard and earn lots of money, then it is the job of the government to ensure that I must have that opportunity. Nobody should stop me from doing that. But after that, whether I avail that opportunity or not, that is my choice. Government should not interfere into that. So only thing that the government should do is to create an equality of opportunity, not the equality of outcome. That is why they say that government should not try to redistribute income from the rich people and giving that to the poor people. Government should not make any attempt to redistribute the income and wealth in the society in order to reduce inequality. Now, the next important question is that can you tell me what is that institutional mechanism that is often used by the government in order to increase equality, redistribute income. So, through what institutional mechanism does the government try to redistribute income and wealth in the society? I hope that some of you may have already figured it out. It is taxation. So, taxation is a system through which government tries to redistribute income and wealth in the society. In taxation, government takes money from the rich people in the form of tax and distribute that among the poor people in the form of welfare measures, in the form of subsidy, etc., which according to them would be unethical. And this is where a very radical suggestion will come up from the libertarian side. So, write down further. Rather change the paragraph and then after write. Thus taxation through which the government tries to redistribute the income and wealth in the society. Taxation through which the government tries to redistribute the income and wealth in the society is wrong. Is wrong. They find a, write down further, they find a logical continuity. They find a logical continuity from taxation. They find a logical continuity from taxation to forced labor to slavery. They find a logical continuity from taxation to forced labor to slavery. So, that is the one important thing that we need to remember here. The idea here is that they say that taxation is an unethical system because taxation is a system in which government takes money from the rich people and it distributes among the poor people. They find logically taxation is equivalent to forced labor, which is equivalent to slavery. How this equivalence can be found? Think of it. Taxation, let's talk about taxation a little. Now, what is a taxation? Taxation is a system in which the government claims a part of my and individuals, my income. And what is my income? The product of my labor. That is what is a taxation. So, the government claims a part of my income, individual's income, which is the product of my and individual's labor. So, that is what we call taxes. Suppose for example, you can say I work very hard throughout the year and I earn a certain income, and at the end of the year, well, government comes to me this month, government comes to me at the end of the year that, well, give me a part of your income, some sort of hafta basuli type of thing, some sort of collection agent. So, that is what taxation is. So, in taxation, government claims a part of an individual's income. If we accept this claim as morally justified, then this is equivalent to the forced labor. What is the forced labor? Forced labor is a system in which the government claims a part of my and individual's labor itself. So, if you accept this claim of the government that government can take part of your product of your labor, then tomorrow the government can say, well, I am not interested in your labor, in your income, give me your labor. So, suppose for example, 1/3 is the income tax, then today government takes 1/3 of my income, tomorrow government can possibly say that give me 1/3 of your labor. So, suppose for example, if you are working in 12 hours a day, then, well, 8 hours you can work in your office and 4 hours you have to work in a government job. That is equal, or more practically, every year 8 months you can work in your office and 4 months every year you have to work for the government. This is what exactly government is doing even today. So if the government takes 1/3 of my income as income tax, then government is taking 4 months of my salary. So and that is a product of my labor. So effectively it appears that 4 months I don't work at all. So whatever I earn in 4 months of salary, that is taken by the government. So tomorrow the government can say, okay, I am not interested in your income, give me 4 months of your labor. So 8 months you can work in your office and 4 months you have to work in whatever job that the government assigns to you. It may be tilling a land, it may be breaking a mountain, whatever it is. So it is equivalent to that, that is called forced labor, and if you accept this claim, then this is equivalent to slavery. What is slavery? Slavery is a system which claims that I, the individual, don't own myself, in which I don't own myself. So in this case, so by taxing us, the government is actually violating my self-ownership right. Government is claiming an ownership over us and we are treated as a part slave. So according to them, the taxation is a type of slavery in a way. Taxation is a type of robbery in a way. Taxation is a forced thing. In that case, taxation is unethical according to them. So by taxing us, the government is acting like a big Robin Hood. You must have heard the stories of Robin Hood. That Robin Hood used to rob the rich people and distribute that money among the poor people. So that is what Robin Hood used to do. Was he ethical? Well, of course you will say no. Well, so would you like a criminal, for example, to rob rich people and distribute among among the poor people? Of course that will be criminal, that will be wrong act. So that is forceful again. Would you like to have a Robin Hood in your neighborhood? Assuming that you are a rich person, if you are a poor person, then you will worship him. But if you are a rich person, would you like to have a Robin Hood in your neighborhood maybe? Of course not. So Robin Hood was unethical. Similarly, government is also unethical when it acts like a big Robin Hood. So taxation is a robbery. Taxing us is the equivalent to treating us like a forced laborer or as a slave maybe, part slave maybe. Because of that, they say taxation is wrong, taxation is unethical, government must reduce the tax as much as possible. And in an ideal society, which may not be possible maybe, then there should be zero taxation. So there should be zero taxation according to them. So that is what an ideal society according to them would be. So every libertarian always demands, this is a famous quote is saying of all the tax cut they demand, that reduce the tax. So you must reduce the tax as much as possible. This is what they demand from the government. Taxation is unethical. Now yesterday I told you that Margaret Thatcher perhaps was the most libertarian of all the prime minister in Britain after the Second World War. But why is it that she was such a libertarian prime minister? This was one thing. Do you know, for example, that before Margaret Thatcher, what was the maximum income tax in Britain before that? I hope some of you may have heard about this. Before Margaret Thatcher, the maximum income tax in Britain was 90%, 90. So maximum income tax in Britain was 90% before that. So such a high tax rate was there that a large number of rich people from Britain started leaving Britain, including the Beatles. You must have heard the songs of Beatles. So Beatles used to earn lots of money, and a majority of that was taken by the government in the form of tax. So they left Britain. So that was one of the reasons that Beatles left the Britain at that time. So that was the high taxation. When the Margaret Thatcher became the prime minister, she suddenly reduced the tax rate from 90% to 30%, and she declared that nobody in Britain will be taxed more than 30%. And that was the plank libertarian demand. Similarly, Ronald Reagan, for example, when he became the president of America, then also tax rate was very high in America. Not as high as 90%, but then also it was a very high taxation in America, and he also reduced that. During the time of Reagan, there is an interesting thing that I remember, that there is a curve in economics. I hope that some of you may have heard about that curve. There is a curve in economy which he made very popular among the common people, including people like me, who have no economics background maybe. So he made this curve, Laffer's curve is the name of that curve. He made this curve very famous among the common people also. What is that Laffer's curve? Laffer's curve is something like this one. It expresses the relationship between the tax collection revenue of the government and the tax rate. What is the connection between the two? Well, Laffer's curve says that between the two, this type of bell-shaped curve is found. What is the meaning of the bell-shaped curve? suppose for example, if the tax rate is 0, if the tax rate is 0%, then revenue will be 0, of course. Revenue will be 0 because there won't be any tax, there is no taxation at all. But suppose, interestingly it was found that suppose for example you make the tax rate as 100%, then also the total revenue becomes 0. Why so? Because if the tax rate is 100%, then nobody will have the motivation to work, because I know that whatever I am going to earn, it will be taken by the government. So why should I work? Why should I earn the money? So nobody will have the motivation to work, nobody will have the willingness to work, nobody will work, nobody will earn money, there won't be any income and there won't be any income tax. Tax rate will become 0. So tax collection will become 0. So that is the two extreme. Then after he said that it is a Laffer's curve says that if you start increasing the tax rate from 0 to higher, then tax collection will keep on increasing. But at a certain point, there is a reversal starts happening. Because if you increase the tax rate further, then instead of further increasing, the collection will go down. So that is what they have found. So high tax rate does not necessarily translate into high tax collection. So that's why he said, Ronald Reagan, every public rally, he used to talk about this curve. And he used to, because of course he was a politician, he had to convince people that I am reducing the tax rate, but I am not doing something wrong by that. I am not compromising on the total tax collection that I am, earning. So suppose for example, if the tax rate is 90%, if you reduce tax rate to 50%, then tax collection will actually increase because of that. You are reducing the tax rate, but the revenue will increase because of that. So he tried to convince the American population that by reducing the tax rate, we are not actually compromising on the government collection, which is a logical thing to do. So of course he has to convince people. It was a utilitarian argument, you can see. But nevertheless, it was an important argument that he tried to convince people from. So this is how he tried to create a public opinion in favor of the tax reduction in the society. So this is what these people, or whatever is the reason, but libertarians say that make the tax rate less. Tax must be as less as possible. That is a libertarian demand. So yesterday I told you that Narendra Modi, for example, was considered to was expected to be a libertarian prime minister. Now after 10 years of Modi rule, you can evaluate that whether he fulfilled the promise of libertarianism or not. How can you do that? One criteria is this: are we paying more tax today or less tax today than 2014? You can evaluate it yourself. If you are paying more tax than 2014, then Modi did not fulfill the promise of libertarianism. But if you are paying less tax than 2014, then Modi fulfilled the promise of libertarianism. So according to libertarian, any politician, their libertarian tendency can be evaluated on looking at their approach towards the taxation. This is what these people say, that tax rate must be reduced. Now before we go to the next point, let us take some questions. I think there are some questions. First question, Nayan. Sir, we see that these theories are written by elite class people who simply sit on their desk and write theories without knowing about the actual problem of the masses. Is my thinking correct, sir? Not necessarily, Nayan, because all of these thinkers are not only armchair philosophers. They do research also, they go to the common people also, and their ideas do help us to make better policies about the government. So some of them may be armchair thinker, but they have lots of data. Nowadays, we do not make the theory on the basis of simply sitting on a theory. We do, as I already told you about the Laffer's curve, for example. It is actually a logical thing to do. So not necessarily correct. Next question, Anil Kumar Roy. Sir, in many countries, there is a legal provision for physically able person to serve in army for at least 2 years. Is it part of the forced labor? Yes, according to libertarian, that is unethical. It is a type of forced labor. Yes, you are right. Next question, sir, all the bureaucrats follow the instructions of the government. Can we say that they are slavery of the government? No, they are not slavery of the government, because you decide to become the bureaucrat. If the government forces you to become bureaucrat, then that will be slavery. But government does not force you. You are actually working very hard to become a bureaucrat. And even after clearing the UPSC exam, you sign on the document. Acceptance offer later, appointment later. So the moment you sign, then you agree. It is based on your consent. Remember, liberty can be reduced by the consent of the individual. So you become bureaucrat and you follow the instructions of the government according to your. I don't have to follow the instruction of the government everywhere, but you will have to follow that. It's because it is your consent, it is not my consent. Isn't it? So it is based on the consent, then it is not slavery. If it is forced, then that will become so. Previous question was a case of slavery, that forcing somebody to do the military service may be a slavery. But being a bureaucrat and then follow the instruction of the government is not slavery. That is consensual act. So next one, sir, if the government did not collect tax, then how develop our society, how build roads, school, etc. All these things can be done by the private people. So according to libertarian, government has no role to play in that. So school, road, etc. must be done by the private. Today also the majority of the roads are made by the private people itself. We pay the toll taxes to them. So they say that all the road must be toll tax type of thing. That let people make the road, give them contract maybe, and then after allow them to maintain that, and let us anybody who uses that should be. So in taxation, I don't really know that whether my money is going to be used. But if taxation is not there, then I will decide whether I am going to use this road or not, depending on, well, how much toll tax I have to pay. But today there is no choice in that case. That is a problem according to libertarians. So everything must be done according to the choice. Next one, according to libertarians, how the government will perform their duties such as public infrastructure, national security, etc. without taxation. There should not be public infrastructure, should not be the government job. It should be done, as I told you, by the private organizations, and people should pay for that whenever they are using that, whoever they are using that. National security, we can make a compromise on that maybe, but in an ideal libertarian society, there is no question of national security, because every nation should be the libertarian in that case. So there will not be any. So anybody who is forcing somebody, threatening somebody, that should be done by the government. People should voluntarily pay the government for that, not a tax. Taxation is forced. Next one, Anirban. So it seems like libertarians and capitalism go hand in hand. Is it true? Yes, definitely, Anirban. That's why I told you that libertarians' basic principle is the free market economy. So capitalism is a necessary condition for liberty according to them. Without capitalism, liberty will never be possible. Yes, you are right. Next question, Spandan. Sir, we are studying the theories provided by foreign thinkers. What about Indian thinkers and their theories? There is nothing called foreign thinkers. Perhaps I told you that in yesterday's class also, that ideas are never foreign nor Indian. Our society is based on such liberty idea. So just because somebody's name you are taking, it does not mean that it becomes a foreign idea. Yesterday I told you that many of these ideas of liberty had been talked about by the people like Mahavir also in the ancient time. So ideas are never foreign. Spandan, I think Spandan was your name. Ideas are never foreign. People may be foreign, people may be there. So if idea suits us, we can take idea. If you look at it, then everything that you are using today is a foreign thing. Nuclear plant is technology is foreign. English language itself is foreign. Is it that you are using here? So most of the engineering that you learn has been developed in the Western country itself, isn't it? So ideas are never foreign. Even the Facebook that you are using, the camera that you are using in this classroom is may have some technology for foreign origin technology maybe. Is it? So ideas are never foreign, never Indian. So if you have no problem in using the science and technology, or you can say other things in the foreign, why are you afraid of the ideas? Our constitution is based on these principles. Liberty is a part of our constitution. Equality is a part of our constitution. Fraternity is a part of our constitution. So just because French Revolution talked about equality, fraternity and liberty does not mean that it is a foreign idea and we should discard them. Isn't it? So as I told you yesterday also, it is just the accident of history that these ideas emerged in some time at some part of the world. Ideas are never foreign, they are never, you can say, Indian. Ideas are universal, ideas are human. So if it is useful for you, adopt it, not useful for you, reject it. But these ideas do appear to be useful because we are trying to make a modern society. Our constitution is like that. Most of the thing in our constitution itself has been taken from some other foreign country, you know. Is it? Our parliament is based on the, you can say, most of administrative system is based on the British system maybe to a great extent. Is it? So is that foreign? Should we reject all the parliament and all? Is it? So don't try to be, to think like that. Ideas are ideas, just take it or reject it. They are good or they are bad. There is nothing called foreign or Indian. So evaluate them as a rational person. Is this idea suiting? Does this idea suit our country, our condition or not? If it suits our country, our condition, adopt it. If it does not suit it, reject it. As simple as that. So that is the first important thing that these people will say. Next one, write down further. there should not be any paternalistic law. There should not be any paternalistic law. Now, they are strongly against paternalism in law, state paternalism, paternalistic law. What is the paternalistic law? Write down further. These are the laws whose sole purpose is to protect an individual from harming himself. Whose sole purpose is to protect an individual from harming himself or herself. So, this is the definition of the paternalistic law. So, there are certain laws whose purpose is that an individual does not harm somebody else. That will be an ethical law because that is based on the non-aggression. But there are some laws whose only purpose is that the individual does not harm himself or herself. Can you think about such a law? Some of the law that is very common in our country, every day we all are affected by that law perhaps, and we all must have felt irritated because of that law sometimes or the other. I hope all of you may have heard about such a law. So, or all of you must have been affected by such a law. The most common day-to-day such law is the case of, you can say, the helmet law or seat belt law. Helmet law, seat belt law, etc. Now, what is the purpose of a helmet law? So, what is the purpose of a helmet law, for example? Whom does the helmet protect? Helmet only protects the person who is wearing that helmet. So, that will be an example of a paternalistic law in that case. Seat belt, whom does the seat belt protect? Seat belt protects only the person who is wearing the seat belt, not anybody else. So, any such law whose only purpose is that the law should protect the individual from himself maybe, then that is an example of a paternalistic law. Paternalistic law, as I told you in yesterday's class, this word had been derived from the word pater. Pater means what? Pater means, as we have seen yesterday, is a Latin word which means father. So, according to these people, libertarians, by making such a law, well, government is acting like a father and we, the adults, are treated like children. So, according to these people, paternalistic law, these laws often infantilize the adults. These laws infantilize the adults. So, they convert the adults into infants and can say children, and state, government or police like a father. So, according to these people, nobody is a child, every individual is capable of deciding what is good and bad for him. State, we do not need it. So, for example, as a father in my family, it's my duty to tell my daughter, for example, that don't play with fire, bete, it will hurt you, you will burn yourself. Because she is a child, she does not know what is harmful and what is harmless. And as a father, it is my duty to protect her. So, I can tell her don't play with the fire, it is harmful, or don't run on the road, that is dangerous. But according to these people, we are adults. We do not need a father sitting on our head, the police for example, which forcing us that wear the helmet, otherwise we will fine you, we will punish you. So, that is unethical. We are actually, our status in the society is diminished because of such a law. We are converted into a child and the state is considering itself as a father, as a benevolent father, as a protective father. This is something according to them wrong. So, if a person wants to ride a bike without a helmet and wants to risk his own head because of that, then well, it is his head. We all have a right to risk our life. People who go to Mount Everest, do they not risk their life? If they can risk their life, then why not a person who is riding on a bike without helmet maybe? So, state should not force the person to wear any such thing. Again, remember one very important, they are not saying that helmets are bad. Helmets are very good maybe, but let people decide whether they want to be protected or not. State forcing somebody doing that will be unethical according to them. So, seat belt law would be an example of that. In India again, NDPS Act will be an example of that. NDPS law, the drug laws, under which Sushant Singh, Arya Chakrabarti for example, or the Aryan Khan case, you must have remembered that. So according to them, drug laws are also unethical because in the drug laws, well, the government is forcing people, telling people, okay, don't use the drug, it is harmful. Let people decide whether it is harmful or harmless. Or let people decide whether they want to consume drug or not. A state should not force people. A state should only maybe possibly we do is to, well, make people aware, but not force them. Forcing them is unethical according to these people. So this is what they will say. I think there is a question before we go to the next point. No, there is no question. There was some other message. So that is the paternalistic law. That is second one. Third one, write down further. There should not be any moral law. There should not be any moral law. Now, what is a moral law? Write down one more line further. These are the laws, moral laws, these are the laws which tries to promote, these are the laws which try to promote a certain, they are the laws which try to promote a certain notion of virtue, which try to promote a certain notion, idea of virtue, or which expresses the conviction of the majority, or which expresses the conviction of the majority. So these are the two important defining characteristics of the moral law according to. So moral law is the one which promotes certain notion of virtue, certain idea of virtue. Now what is the virtue? Virtue we will discuss in a few days later, and one whole class I will devote to the virtue theory. But here we can simply say that virtue is basically an idea in which the state, the government decides something as good and something else as bad, and makes a law to promote the good in the society and to discourage the bad. So by making a law, government promotes certain idea of what is good and demotes or discourages certain idea of what is bad. So such a thing is called virtue. Now according to the libertarians, as you can appreciate from the previous discussions that we have done, that well, government cannot decide good and bad. Good and bad can be decided by whom? I hope you can understand that, by only by the individual. So only individual has a conscience, state does not have a conscience. So only an individual can decide what is good and what is bad. State has no locus standi, state has no ability to decide what is good and what is bad. So state cannot decide good and bad. In fact, according to libertarian, there is nothing called bad. There are only two bad things are there in the world. What are they? Harming others is bad and cheating others is bad. So if a person is not harming somebody else, if a person is not cheating somebody else, then well, everything else that the person is doing is good. So this is what these people will say here. So that is the one important definition of the moral law. Second important definition of the moral law is that it expresses the conviction of the majority. So when a majority of the people in the society believe in something and you make that into a law, then that law will become an example of a moral law. This is what these people suggest, and that is what is unethical according to them. What are some of the examples of a moral law? Let's talk about that. Write down further. Thus, any law against prostitution any law against prostitution, adultery or homosexuality are wrong. Any law against prostitution, adultery or homosexuality are wrong because they violate the rights of the adults, because they violate the rights of the adults to choose their sexual partners. Because they violate they violate the rights of the adults to choose their sexual partners. So this is the next thing that they will say. They will say here that any law against prostitution, first of all, is wrong. What is, why? If you, all of these things, let's take prostitution first of all. What is the, why is it that prostitution is considered to be bad, and in most of the society it is considered to be an, I can say there are some restrictions on that. According to libertarian, it is because that most of the people in the society have a certain idea of so-called good women and bad women. So the women who engage in such act like prostitution, for example, they are considered to be vicious women, bad women, and they should be considered, they should be thrown out of the society, they cannot be allowed to live near us. So many people believe that, and that is the ground on which, well, in most of the society, prostitution is often considered to be an immoral and illegal act as well. Now, according to libertarians, that is wrong. Who are we or the state to say that these women are bad women? According to libertarian, there is nothing called bad women. There are only two bad women are there. Who are they? Well, the women who cheat others, the women who harm others. There are only two bad, remember, man or woman does not matter. So, apart from that, we cannot define something as bad, as say, prostitutes are bad women. No, there is nothing called bad. So, that's why I can say any law against prostitution will be wrong. Again, they say that women should not be forced into prostitution. That will be a violation of the first principle, non-aggression. But if a woman wants to become prostitute because of her own choice, then it is her choice and the state should not interfere into that. So that was the thing. Secondly, adultery. Adultery in India, for example, 497, section 497 of the IPC, well, had outlawed, you can say, adultery was a criminal offense, and a lot of debate was there. Finally, the Supreme Court of India had annulled that that section. Now, what was wrong in adultery law in India? The wrong in adultery law was in this sense again, the very definition of the adultery itself was a problematic definition. Do you know what was the definition of adultery under that law? Under that law, the definition of adultery was that when a man, think of it, when a man enters into a sexual relationship with a woman, married woman, when a man enters into a sexual relationship with a married woman without the consent of her husband, then this act will be called the act of adultery. I repeat, when a man enters into a sexual relationship with a married woman without the consent of her husband, then this act will be defined as adultery. Now, do you find some problem in that definition? I hope that all of you must have already thought about it. So, in this case, the problematic clause was without the consent of the husband. So, why the husband's consent is matters here? That is the question here. So, if the husband's consent is there, then it is no longer adultery. But if the husband's consent is not there, then only it will be adultery. So, this law was based on the premise that husband is the owner and wife is his property. So, women is considered, because we give consent only to our own property. I can give consent about myself because I am my own property, ownership right. But, well, if I give consent to somebody else, then that will be type of slavery in a way. So, in this case, the woman is considered as the property and husband is the owner. That is the one problem was there. It was violation of the self-ownership right of the women. Number one. Second problem in this definition was that in the case of adultery, case was always between the man and the husband. Man and the husband, in which man was the guilty party and husband was the aggrieved party. Women was nowhere in the question. So it was a case between the husband of women and the man. That is the second problem. So husband was, you can say, not directly involved in any sexual act, but still he was a party to the, he was the main party. Second problem. And third problem in this law was that under the adultery law, only man was punished, women was never punished. So it was only between the two, and if the adultery is proved that it was an adulterous act, then this man would be put in jail for up to 5 years. Now, according to libertarian, that will be wrong. Now, some people said at that time it is a pro-women law because women are never punished. It is not pro-women, it's a highly anti-women law. Because punishment is a part of moral agency. Punishment is given only to the human beings who are, well, morally responsible in that case. We don't give punishment to a dog. When a dog barks at you, then you do not file a case against put the dog in jail. So punishment is given only to the human beings, and women is not even considered to be worthy of punishment. So it is the demeaning of the status of the women less than human. So in all these three parts of the definition, women is considered to be less than the human. That was the problem. So according to them, this is the problem with the adultery law. Only thing that they say that adultery can be simply considered as a special case of cheating, where both the man and women, well, can be guilty of that. Well, it's not only women or man, you can say husband is the aggrieved party. Both the man and women can be guilty, and adultery can be a ground of divorce. So that is a cheating, but it is not, should not be a crime as such separately, a criminal offense. It should just be a civil offense, a special case of cheating on the ground of which divorce can be demanded or divorce can be granted. So this is what these people will say. So that was adultery. Similarly, you can say homosexuality. In India, section 377, somebody had already asked a question about that. Now, homosexuality, in India, it was not such a big political and moral issue in general, because traditionally Indian culture, homosexuality was actually allowed. You go to Khajuraho temple, you can find many such homosexual acts, and all in the Indian mythology also many homosexual acts characters will be there. Not in Semitic religion, Christianity or Islam, for example, homosexuality was considered as a sin. And in most of the Christian countries, for homosexuality, death penalty was given. For adultery also, adultery was also considered as a sin according to the Semitic religion, Islam and Christianity. And for adultery, that stoning to death was the punishment. Similarly, in the case of homosexuality also, in most of the Christian countries, well, the death penalty was prescribed for the homosexuality. So, such great people you may be aware, like Oscar Wilde, for example. He was given death penalty, one of the greatest author in the English language. Now, he was given death penalty on the charge of homosexuality. Or, what was the name of that person? The founder of the computer science in the 20th century, one of the greatest mathematician of the 20th century. He is Alan Turing. So, Alan Turing, I hope that you must have heard his name as well. So Alan Turing, for example, Alan Turing was one of the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, and he was actually responsible for the breaking the Morse code, decoding the Morse code of German army that led to the victory of Britain, Allied forces, and fall of the Germany in the Second World War. One of the greatest mathematician, the father of the computer science, and he was charged with homosexuality and given death penalty for that. So such great people were, well, given death penalty on the charges of homosexuality. But I forget about a number of other common people. So, but according to the libertarian, there is nothing wrong in homosexuality. People engage in their private life of the people, let people decide whether they want to enter into a homosexual or heterosexual relationship. The state should not interfere into that. On that ground, it is violation of the self-ownership right of the individual. So, by forcing people, by punishing, making law on homosexuality, the state is acting itself like, again, owner and individual as a slave, as a property maybe. So, it was on this ground, self-ownership ground also, that Supreme Court in India, well, made homosexuality, decriminalized homosexuality in India. So, these are the examples of moral law. Write down further. Write down further. Any law against abortion, contraception, or family planning. Any law against abortion, contraception or family planning are also wrong. Because they violate the rights of the women over her own body. Rights of the women over her own body. So that is the next important thing. These again are the examples of moral law according to them. Abortion, for example, abortion we have discussed a number of times earlier also. So according to them, in India, for example, the abortion limit of abortion is 20 weeks of pregnancy, increased in the last year the 24 weeks of pregnancy under certain grounds. But according to libertarian, well, government should not make any law against abortion. Abortion must be the only right of the women. So just because a woman has become pregnant does not mean that the state can force her to remain pregnant till the end of the pregnancy again. So by making abortion law, the government is actually claiming a ownership right over the womb of the women. So womb of the woman is the woman's her own body, her own property. She has the ownership right. Nobody else should interfere into that. So a state cannot force a woman to abort or not to abort. It must be right of the only women. Not even the husband can do anything. Husband can try to convince and talk to the women, but husband is not the owner of the body of the women. So because of contraception further, contraception again is not a big political and moral issue in our country, but it had been a big issue in the Semitic religion, because Semitic religion, Islam and Christianity, for example, contraception was also considered to be a can say problematic thing against the religious conviction. Because of that, till very recently, in many states in America, contraception was actually banned. Nobody can use the contraception. That was the law. Now it has been changed, but till very recently, you know that in many states in America, including Texas, etc., contraception was banned. Many European countries also contraception was banned. But according to libertarian, well, it is the choice of the woman. Let her decide whether to use contraception or not. Similarly, family planning. How many children a woman wants to have? No child, one child, 2 children or 10 children. It is only her choice. A state should not make any law on that at how many children a woman should have. So all of these are the examples of moral law. Now, can you think of some more examples of moral law in our country? Do some brainstorming. Well, idea is that some of the examples I can give you, you can think of more such examples. If you look at Indian Constitution, for example, the whole of Article 51A, fundamental duty, would be an example of a moral law. So according to libertarian, there is nothing called fundamental duty. If you look at fundamental duty, then there are only 2 fundamental duties are there. What are they? Don't harm others, don't cheat others. So only 2 fundamental duties are there, everything else is right. So according to these people, well, there is nothing called fundamental duty, there are only fundamental rights. So they are strong, because fundamental duty, by making that, government is telling us what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. That is another thing. Because of that, in most of the liberal democracies, well, fundamental duties are never there. In Indian Constitution also, we had taken fundamental duties from a illiberal constitution. What was that? USSR. So USSR had fundamental duties. The liberal constitution has nowhere. India is an outlier in that case. Perhaps the only liberal democracy where fundamental duties are there. So that would be an example of moral law. Or most of, not all, most of DPSP would be an example of moral law. Most of the DPSP, for example, well, the UCC. UCC that is there, so that could be an example of the, so according to them, government should not, for example, one important provision of UCC was that there should be a monogamy for all. Now, according to these people, who is the government to decide whether monogamy is a good system of marriage and polygamy is bad? So, let people decide whether they want to. So, if some people want to enter into a polygamous relationship because of their own choice, then it is their choice. The state should not interfere into that. So, a state can possibly make, in today's newspaper itself, I hope that you might have read in the morning, Indian Express, that, well, they are trying to formulate what type of UCC they want to have. And some clauses does appear to be appealing here, that UCC only, if you have to uniform civil code, then only thing that you should ensure is the discrimination against any person should not be there. Nobody should be forced to do something in a relationship. But after that, let people decide what type of relationship that they want to have, what type of code that they want to follow. So, most of the UCC would be example of the DP, you can say this thing, or the many such other things. You can say ban on the beef, for example. Let me see if there is a question. Nimai, sir, as far as I know, marital rape in India is legal. It hampers the liberty of the individual. Why India does not enact any law for the protection of individual's liberty? Yes, Nimai, marital rape in India is legal. We call that as MRE, marital rape in exception. That will be an example of this thing. Because so rape is always a crime except in one. There is only one exception of rape being a crime, and that is marital rape. So we call that as MRE, marital rape exception. And a case is going on in the Supreme Court right now where some people are actually demanding that marital rape must also be made a crime. And that is a libertarian demand also, because rape is always a crime. Rape is a force. And force is always wrong according to the libertarian principle. So you are right that, well, marital rape exception should not be there according to libertarian principle. It is the violation of the liberty of the individual. It is an act of aggression as an act of force. Braja, sir, if abortion is right of the woman over her own body, then why government rule that 20 weeks any parent can't be? Yes, exactly. This is what they say, that this law is an unethical law according to libertarians. So again, as I told you that we are not 100% libertarian society. So libertarians demand in India also that the abortion law should not be there. If the strict libertarians demand that. So it is a you can say unethical law according to libertarians. So next one, ban on the beef. In most of the states in our country, beef is banned. Now, this is the ban on the beef will fulfill the second criteria of the moral law. Because what is the ground on which beef is banned in India? Well, the ground is that majority of the Hindus believe that beef is bad, and you make into a law. So what about the belief of conviction of those people who do not have a similar belief? Is that not a violation of the liberty of such other people? So that will be an example of a moral law. Ban on the beef will be an example of moral law. The second criteria, conviction of the majority converted into a law. Think about any such thing. You can say things like, say, ban on the pornography, for example. Ban on the pornography will be an example of that. So they say that yes, let people decide whether they want to watch pornography or not. Who is the government to tell people don't watch it? It's their choice. So let the choice of the people be. So ban on the pornography will be an example of that. MRE I already talked about. Or you can say, think of any such law. Large number of such laws are there that you can think of as a you can say the moral law. For example, the censorship, for example. Censorship, according to them, there should not be anything like censorship. So they say that government should only do that if a film is made, then government should not censor the film. Only thing, certification should be there. So normally censorship is done on two grounds. Again, the sexual content and the violent content. So only thing that the government should do is to force the filmmakers that in the banner itself they should write that this film contains certain sexually implicit material. Then after, let people decide whether they want to watch sexual material or not. Similarly, violence, the government should only force the filmmaker to certify that this film contains certain violent scene. And then after, let people to decide whether they want to see the violence or not. Nothing should be censored as such. Censorship is wrong according to them. So that is one important thing. Or any such things like, you can say, the um, UCC was one of them, or the 51A already we talked about. Blasphemy law. Blasphemy law. In India, though we do not have blasphemy law, but we have a similar law like blasphemy, religious sensibilities law, for example. So there should not be any blasphemy. In blasphemy, in many religious countries, maybe in many European countries also earlier, for blasphemy also death penalty was prescribed. But according to them, well, people have a right to criticize the religions. The government should not interfere into that. So blasphemy law, if that is there, it will be an example. Sedition law would be an example of that. Prohibition could be an example of that, banning of alcohol. So these are all examples of the moral law. So think about any such law. Whenever you see a law, well, then try to find out which this law fulfills what criteria. Does it fall under paternalistic law? Does it fall under the moral law, or what? That will give you a good idea about what libertarians talk about. So according to libertarian, all of these laws are wrong. Now before we end this topic and go to the next one, very important thing that I would like to tell you, that libertarians do not say that prostitution is right. They simply say that prostitution is neither right nor it is wrong. Whether it is right and wrong, leave that to the individual to decide. But if you make a law on that, then that will definitely be a bad law. So they are not suggesting it is right and everybody should become a prostitute. Similarly, adultery, they are not saying that adultery is right and everybody should become adulterous. They simply say, or homosexual for example, they simply say that adultery or homosexuality is neither right nor it is wrong. And only thing that they say that let us not make a law on that. Let people decide whether adultery is right or wrong. Let people decide whether homosexuality is right and wrong. But if you make a law on that, then that law will necessarily be unethical law. So all of these are the abortion similarly. They are not saying that abortion is right and every woman should do the abortion. They only say abortion, let women decide whether they want to do the abortion or not. But if the state makes a law on that, then that will be necessarily a moral law. Moral policing, as it is seen in Iran recently, yes, definitely it is a wrong. Even in India, moral policing is done very often. So just yesterday itself, I had seen that I had read in the newspaper, in the today's newspaper itself perhaps, that somewhere in Noida near Delhi, for example, well, when Kamar Yatra is going on, so the path of the Kamar Yatra, on that path, all the meat shop has been closed in that area. Now, or during Ram Navami, many places meat shops are forced to be closed, including in Delhi also. Now, according to them, that will be an example of a moral policing, moral law. So, let people decide what they want. Nobody should force anybody else to do something or the other because of our sensibility in a way. So that is the thing. So all of these are the examples. So that moral policing is an example of that, definitely. So think about any such law which are all examples of the moral law according to the libertarian principle, and all such laws are unethical. So that is the one thing. Then finally last one, I will try to sum up things together in one last point, rest of the things. Write down further. There should not be any occupational licensing, there should not be any occupational licensing, no minimum wage law, no minimum wage law, no anti-employment discrimination law, no government run mandatory pension scheme, etc., etc. There should not be any occupational licensing, no minimum wage law, no anti-employment discrimination law, no government run mandatory pension scheme, etc., etc. So that is another important thing. The idea here is that all of these are economic restriction, occupation licensing, for example. Just take one small example and think of it and tell me. Suppose, for example, there are two people, say A and B, and for the sake of simplicity of the argument, let us assume that both of them have an equal knowledge of the medical science, but this person has the MBBS degree, suppose, and this person does not have the MBBS degree. Then you know that in our country, well, so in our country, this person is allowed to open a clinic and he is not allowed to open a clinic. Now the question is that do you think that this is a discrimination against that person? Do you think that it is violation of liberty of this second person? In my class, when I asked this question, many students say, sir, it is justified. There is no violation of liberty. And when I ask them that why do you think that, why should this person forced to not start a business that he wants to have, like a clinic, for example, then many students say that no sir, this person may harm somebody because he is not qualified to become a doctor. But according to libertarian, that is a spurious argument. Why so? Because first of all, harm is a very problematic thing. Can you guarantee, for example, that the MBBS doctor will not harm anybody? There is no guarantee. Even MBBS doctors can do very wrong maybe. So harm is not a very you can say something that can 100% be predicted or prevented. But even if you assume that MBBS doctor is less likely to harm a person than non-MBBS doctor, then also according to libertarian, we should not restrict that person. Only thing that we should do here, government should do, is that the government can possibly force this person to write on his board that I am not an MBBS doctor. I am not an MBBS doctor, but he can claim that I am a good doctor, which anybody can claim. So being good is not a value, is a personal value judgment which everybody is capable of doing that. So everybody can claim that we are. So I find it very interesting that in Delhi, for example, in the area where you can see these coaching institutes are there, our coaching included, then every coaching institute, they all claim that our coaching is the best coaching for UPSC preparation, including we also. We are good institute, for example. Then can we stop them from claiming that they are the best one? We all have a right to claim that we are the best one. Only thing that we are prohibited from, we should be prohibited from, is that we should not mislead people. So these people, this person should not misinform people that he is an MBBS doctor, which he is not. He should honestly tell everybody that I am not an MBBS doctor, but I am a good doctor. After that, let it be. Suppose, for example, further harm, if you look at it. Suppose, for example, this person, since he is an MBBS doctor, so suppose he is charging 500 rupees as fees, and since he is not an MBBS doctor, so suppose he is charging only 100 rupees as fees, and suppose I am a third person C, and I am willing to go to this person for a treatment, and well, willing to risk my life in order to save 400 rupees, then well, it is my life. Who is the government to force me to go to that person and shell out 400 rupees extra? So it's not a violation of liberty of that person alone, it's violation of my liberty as well. So government cannot force. So government is forcing me by licensing this person. Government is forcing me to spend 400 rupees extra that I may have decided to spend somewhere else maybe. So if I trust this person, for example, then I would like to be treated by him, and save 400 rupees in that case. So that is where the problem, according to them, is. So this is what these people will say. So this is called occupational licensing. There should not be any occupational licensing. Minimum wage law we already talked about yesterday. Government cannot decide minimum or maximum wage. Let people decide what is the minimum or maximum. There should not be anti-employment discrimination law like affirmative action, like you can say reservation, etc. There should not be government run mandatory PF scheme, pension scheme. Government should not force people to save the money when they are earning so that they can have a comfortable old age maybe pension. So all these laws according to them will be unethical. That is what they say. So the idea here is that, again, remember one thing small, that they are not against any of things. That's a very important thing that people often forget about the libertarians. So libertarians are not against the MBBS degree. They are against the licensing. They are not against minimum wage. They are against the law. They are not in favor of employment discrimination among the people. They are against the law. They are not against pension scheme as such. They are against it being mandatory by nature by government. So according to them, that anything that is made mandatory by the government, that will become unethical. Anything that is forced upon the people by the government, that will be unethical. So government should not do any of such things, because all of these actions of the government necessarily violates the liberty of some people or the other. So finally, in a way, we can see that what libertarians are saying here, that in the Middle Age, in the 17th, 18th and 19th century, the philosophers in the world, philosophers, statesmen, or the ideologues, the politicians, the common people also, they work very hard to ensure that there should be a strict separation between the state and the church. Because earlier, you may be aware, in the Middle Age and in ancient age, church has a strong influence on the state activities in the European society. So they try to separate the church from the state. They say that the state must be independent of the church. Church should not interfere into the political activity of the state. And to a great extent, that separation has been achieved. We call this separation between the two as secularization of the state. So secularization has taken place to a great extent in the modern democracy in general. Now, so modern democracy do not have a state religion as such. Church does not directly interfere into the political activity in the state. That has been achieved to a great extent. But according to libertarians, that now the time has come that the state must separate itself from the other aspects of life. It's also, for example, a state must separate itself from morality. A state must separate itself from the market. A state must separate itself from the private life of the people. A state must separate itself from the media, expression, film, etc., censorship. A state must separate itself from the land use, etc., etc. So they say that now the time has come that this has been achieved, but now the time has come that a state must move ahead and separate itself from every other aspect of human life. And in an ideal society, a state should restrict itself, limit itself only to two things. What are those two things? Non-aggression and ensuring non-aggression, and the assurance of enforcement of the contract. So this is what these people will say. So according to libertarians further, one way to understand this thing is that these people will say that in the state of nature, remember, in the state of nature, well, people used to suffer because of the crime. That people used to harm each other, kill each other, because there was nothing, was no police, no state, no government was there to protect the people. Life of the human being were, as Hobbes said, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. So in a state of nature, people used to suffer because of the crime, but now they say that in this moral, you can say, society with a state, crime has become reduced. Crime is no longer the most important cause of human suffering. Remember that quotation of Steven Pinker that I told you on that day, that we are living in such a crimeless society, peaceful society, that today we are more likely to die of sugar powder than of gunpowder. So gun does not kill many people, crime does not kill many people. Crime is to a great extent under control in most of the modern society, because the state has fulfilled that function. So crime is no longer the cause of human suffering. But today, according to these people, the most important cause of human suffering is the law. So people suffer not because of crime, people suffer because of the law. So now the time has come that law should cease to be the source of cause of human suffering. So there must be minimization of the law, law must be reduced as much as possible. So that is the idea of libertarianism here. So you can see here that if, as I told you yesterday, that many people said that Narendra Modi might become a libertarian prime minister in India. Now, if you want to check whether he became the libertarian prime minister or not, taxation can be one thing that I talked about. Are we paying more tax or less tax than 2014? Second thing that you can see, that do we have to follow more law or less law in comparison to 2014 in India? If you have to follow more law on our day-to-day life, then perhaps, well, libertarian promise was not fulfilled. But if you have to follow less law today than we had in 2014, then libertarian promise has been fulfilled. You can evaluate it yourself. So, this is what the libertarians will say about state activity, both what state should do and what state should not do. I think there is a question. Vidisha Sarkar. Sir, what are libertarian philosophies regarding national boundaries or international security? Vidisha, two answers can be given. First answer could be that in an ideal libertarian society world, well, there should not be any international boundary. That is a simple thing, because libertarian says only individual sovereignty is there. So, there is nothing called national boundary. So, if the whole world becomes libertarian, then there won't be any international boundary and international security. Number one. Number two, well, so that will be an ideal thing, that may not be possible. But otherwise, you can say national security is an important thing, because that national security is necessary because it will violate the self-ownership right of the individual, protection of the you can say property right of the individual, or non-aggression principle. So, national security is done for the sake of non-aggression, for the sake of defense, not to harm. So, national aggression you can say the military etc. or defense policy etc. should be only aimed at defense, not at aggression against some other country. So, Ukraine may be justified to have the national security, Russia may not be. Russia has attacked Ukraine. So, attack is wrong, defense is right. And for the sake of defense, we can maintain an army also, security also. And international system we must stop, we must prevent any attack, any invasion. That is what libertarians may possibly say. Though we will talk about international system more in the next class, maybe on Monday or Tuesday. Let us see that when can we do that. We will talk about one whole class, we will talk about international relations and ethics. But that we will discuss in the next week's class. So, that is all about the libertarians. Now, till this point, if you think logically, then you may agree with most of the ideas of libertarians. But libertarians do not stop at this only, a little acceptable thing. Libertarians go very far and they support many things that has created lots of controversy in the field of libertarianism also. So, let us talk about some negative side of the libertarianism. Write down firstly, criticism of libertarianism. Well, let me take that question before we talk about criticism. There is one more question. As our country is more diverse than other countries, especially the West, as this ideology is more tilted towards a capitalistic approach, does this change the perception of our diversity? Who asked this question? Well, our country is more diverse country, and because of that, this theory becomes especially important for a country like India. Well, libertarians always talk about we must protect all the diversity. So, this theory is perhaps most relevant for a country like India, more relevant than perhaps any other country in the world. Yesterday, I talked about diversity is a subset of liberty, isn't it? So, this theory is much more relevant for our country than perhaps any other country in the world. Because only by protecting liberty of everybody else, we can respect diversity and we can make a peaceful society. So, is a fully liberal or world practically possible? No. May not be possible, but that it should not. Again, remember that as I told you in the introduction class itself, that this question should not be raised in my class, practically possible or not. We are not talking all about practicality. We should try to create an ideal. Let us move towards that. So, whether it is practically possible or not is not our concern. As I told you earlier also, it is an ideal society, ideal system, but ideal also creates a condition where we can move towards. Remember, ethics is always directive. So, this theory talks about a certain direction that our society should slowly move towards that ideal, which may possibly be practically be possible or not. At least we can move towards that. That is what purpose is. Write down further, change the paragraph, then up write for criticism of libertarianism. Write down, the libertarians go to such an extreme. The libertarians go to such an extreme for the sake of individual liberty. Libertarians go to such an extreme for the sake of individual liberty and support even the following which many of us may not accept. So these are the extreme form of libertarianism. First one, suicide. Just write down one line. They support suicide on the ground of self-ownership principle of self-ownership. They support suicide on the ground of the principle of self-ownership. So this is the first important thing. Suicide, as we have seen earlier, that it is within the purview of the self-ownership principle according to them. I am the owner of myself, so I have a right to terminate my life also. So nobody should stop me from doing that. So the idea is that in our country, everywhere in the world, most of the liberal democracy, well, government runs a suicide prevention program. So, well, if you read any news of the suicide in a newspaper, then at the end of the news you will find that there will be a suicide prevention helpline is there, where it is suggested that if you have a suicidal thought and if you know somebody having suicidal thought, then you can make a call on that number and some counselor will come and support you, provide you some counseling, well, supported by the government. So government spends lots of money on that, but according to libertarian, that is unethical. The government should not prevent suicide in the society. Let people decide whether they want to commit suicide or not. If somebody is trying to commit suicide, it is their right and we should not try to prevent that. By preventing that person, we are actually acting like a father, paternalistic act. But perhaps all of us may not agree with, say, libertarians on that ground. That how can we see that suicide is a normal act? So people who commit suicide, they should be somehow provided some counseling and government has a role to play in that. This is what possibly we believe in. Second similar thing is euthanasia. Write down further. They support euthanasia. They support euthanasia, but not on the ground of. They support euthanasia, but not on the ground of. But not on the ground of compassion and dignity, but in the name of liberty and consent. They support euthanasia, but not on the ground of compassion and dignity, but in the name of liberty and consent. But in the name of liberty and consent. So that is the next important thing. The euthanasia, we have talked a little about that in our earlier class. Now, people support euthanasia on these three grounds. Some people say compassion. That person is suffering, so let us make the person die to eliminate his suffering, his pain. If that is your ground, that is not what libertarian ground. That will be the utilitarian ground. That reducing the pain as a cause of your behavior is the utilitarian principle. Pain is bad, pain must be relieved. Dignity, as we will see, is a Kantian ground, not a libertarian ground. So Kantian ground we will talk about in next class and next day also. According to them, both of them are not the cause of euthanasia for which they support. They say that consent is the libertarian ground and that alone. So consent, according to them, is the necessary condition of euthanasia as well as sufficient condition. What is the meaning of that? That without consent, euthanasia is never right. Nothing else can justify euthanasia if consent is not there. And if consent is there, then nothing else is required to justify euthanasia. It is necessary as well as sufficient condition of justification of euthanasia. Second one. Third one, sale of organ. Well, you can imagine the answer that they support the sale of organ on the name of the principle of self-ownership. So, I am the owner of myself, my body, so I have a right to sell my kidney also, nobody should stop me from that. But that is something that perhaps we may not agree with. Fourth one, all types of surrogacy. All types of surrogacy, they will support that. But again here we talk about altruistic and commercial surrogacy, etc. That is where you can just write down a line that they support all of these things on the ground of self-ownership principle. Not only that, they go to so far to support things also like, say, consensual cannibalism. Well, I will not discuss that in a class, that is too disturbing to discuss in a classroom like this. But there are some people, well, if you want to see about that case, then you can Google this word out after the class. You will find the consensual cannibalism, where you will find that there are some people, particularly in Germany it had happened, I remember 25 years ago maybe, when I was a student. Then in Germany it had happened that there was a man who became cannibal by the consent of his own victim. According to libertarian, there is nothing. Consent was there, so we should not interfere into that. So that is where the problem is. Can we support such acts on the ground of consent? The idea of libertarianism is that they simply say that only criteria to define the morality, as a summary of everything, only criteria to define the morality of an act is the consent of the individual. So if the consent is there, then everything is right. If the consent is not there, then everything is wrong. So if the consent is there, then even the things like suicide, euthanasia, sale of organ, cannibalism, etc. can become right. And if the consent is not there, then even the things like, you can see, the taxation or welfare, etc., subsidy, etc. would become wrong. But we all believe that no, consent cannot be that high. There has to be something more than consent that can tell us what is right and what is wrong. What is that thing which is higher than consent? We will talk about that in the next theory. So that is one important criticism of this theory, that consent does not appear to be the best theory of ethics in a way. One more thing we can write about further, second criticism. Write down. This theory is also criticized as being pro-rich and capitalist and anti-poor. This theory is also criticized as being pro-rich and pro-capitalist and anti-poor. This I hope that many of you might have already figured out, that if you make a society purely on the basis of libertarian principle, then in such a society, rich people will have a lots of advantage, capitalists, because they are always, rich people are, capitalists are always in a position to bargain, negotiate, take advantage of their condition. And in such a society, poor people will always suffer. No subsidy will be there, no, I can say, the welfare measures will be there. So poor people will suffer. Just as in a case of utilitarian society, we had seen that the minorities will suffer in that society. Here minorities will not suffer, poor people will suffer, majority maybe. So libertarian society is often accused as being anti-poor society. I remember when in, I can say, last election that she was fighting, Margaret Thatcher, then I was a very young child at that point of time, but there was one interesting slogan that was used in, you can say, in previous parliamentary election by the Labour Party against her. That was very good, so catchy it was that I remember that even today. So in that, you can say, there was a slogan in Britain in last election that she fought, that Thatcher, milk snatcher. Now before Thatcher, there was a high subsidy was there on the milk of the children in Britain, and she removed all the subsidy. So milk became very costly in Britain after that. So many people said Thatcher, milk snatcher. She had snatched the milk from the mouth of the poor children. So this is the type of criticism that libertarian people are often accused of, that they are anti-poor, they do not take enough interest of the consideration, interest of the poor, they are more pro-capitalist and all. So that is one criticism that libertarians have. So how can we handle these criticism? Well, we will talk about that in the next theory, that how all these questions, critical questions, can properly be answered. But before that, let's take one question, I think. What was that the Armin Meiwes case, sir? Figure it out yourself. That is not important. We don't have to use that in our class. I just talked about the name, and you have to simply take the name. They will support, the libertarians will support that. Anil Kumar Roy. Sir, many countries are willing to bring in an alternative punishment to hanging on basis of reasonable argument that in modern society, hanging punishment is directly state murder and it is outdated. Also, the sentenced person suffers more pain in hanging. What is the ethical issue and standard here? Well, you are right that this is the ground on which many people oppose the capital punishment. Capital punishment is a very controversial topic. Many people support that on some ground and many people oppose that. Libertarians may possibly will not have any opinion about capital punishment, except that in case of murder, maybe it will be justified. Otherwise, because that is a force, equal amount of force can be applied. But for other crime like homosexuality, adultery, etc., that would be unjustified according to the libertarian also. So how can we answer these questions? We will talk about that in the next class.